Hey, welcome to Discard. Today I'm going to talk about a few non-permanent hacks and mods that you can do to your shelf to make it a better environment for displaying your games, finding your games, and just overall being a better shelf. Let's take a look. So one of the first things I recommend to people if they're looking for a shelf for their game room is finding a shelf that is generally a good build quality, but also look for one that comes with extra parts. When I chose some of the basic bookcases for my game room, I chose these bookcases that came from IKEA, and they came with extra shelves that you could purchase from them. And I think that's a really great thing. These Billy bookcases are fantastic in general, but also being able to get extra shelves for them really makes it so you can make each shelf its perfect size and put extra shelves on there if you want to. So it's just kind of a smaller idea, is finding those extra shelves so that you can kind of mod out your shelf the way you want to, as for how many shelves you want to put on there, what size those shelves are going to be, how many games are going to be going on them, and that kind of thing. Now, one of the great benefits of getting those extra shelves for your bookcase is if you have extras that you don't plan to use, they work fantastic as dividers for those shelves. One of my biggest problems with the Billy bookcase is that it's just too standard. It looks just like any other bookcase that I've had throughout my life, and it's just kind of simple. It doesn't do anything for the items that are in it necessarily, other than just kind of sit there. So having these extra shelves to kind of change up the space is a really big deal, because you can use them to divide up the space. All you have to do is get that shelf and turn it vertically, and then it can become a divider for any one of your shelves on that bookcase. I find that dividing up a bookcase is a big deal. It kind of makes it more modular and gives different areas for different items. And you can kind of cut off a zone. If you only have a certain amount of games, you can have them in a smaller side of one shelf, and that makes a big deal when it comes to displaying things on your shelf. So not only does it make it more visually interesting to have these kind of modules all around your shelf with these dividers, but also at the same time, it makes it more functional so you can find your items and have spaces for them, and just generally, it looks really awesome. Now, the dividers you see on my Billy bookcase are actually from a smaller width Billy bookcase that's for a smaller area. You can also get these from IKEA, and it's awesome just to get those extra shelves for them, because you can use them as these small kind of set dividers for your Billy bookcase. Those just generally worked fantastic. I used them on a couple different shelves that I have to kind of cordon off a couple different areas, and it looks pretty awesome. But of course, if you don't have those extra shelf inserts, you can always go out and make your own. You can always take a piece of wood and cut it to size and insert it that way. In fact, it might be even better, because you can customize it and make it the perfect size for what you want to make. Another kind of smaller mod that you can do to make your shelves look awesome is by adding some sort of container in the inside of your shelf. I have some clear plastic containers that I've used for just kind of general items in my office, and I use them to show kind of how that works. You can kind of take it and turn it on its side, and then use the top of it for different items and figures and games, as well as the inside of it. And then the side of it can function as a kind of a book holder. You can use it as a bookend to hold up a bunch of books. And especially in some of these larger books, you're going to need kind of a larger shelf. So inserting this in there is going to act as a riser, another container, as well as a bookend. And that's really a great thing. A lot of cool containers can be found at places like Goodwill or thrift shopping, and that's a really great place to look for some really cool original containers to put in there. As well as some big box stores, you might be able to find some of these clear containers or some solid white containers, or whatever color shelf that you're using containers, and get them and put them in there, and it looks awesome. And most of the time, people aren't really thinking about the container itself, more as the stuff that's in it or around it. One of the ideas that I talked about in my 5 quick game display series was backing a shelf. And I do think that it makes a huge difference to a general shelf to have something on the back side of your shelf kind of covering up, or at least partially covering up, some of that just plain background. There are a few different instances where it works pretty good to have a solid color background behind something, specifically having a giant figure in the space that for the most part covers the majority of the space on its own. You may not want to put something else back there, and it may look too busy with that. But I'd say for the majority of collections and different things that you're putting on shelves, it looks a lot nicer to have something back there. It doesn't have to cover the entire space, but generally speaking, just having something back there can make it look really awesome. So a few different things that you can do to back your shelves would be taking posters and then putting them on the back side of your shelf, A lot of shelves do not have the actual shelf inserts attached to the back side, so you can slip a poster on the back side of all of your shelves. Just know that you may be damaging the poster in this way, and the back side of those shelf inserts might actually rub against it, causing damage. So if you're going to do it with a poster that you don't mind breaking, or get a poster printed out on your own and use that one. In one of the sections of my shelf, I have these Starlink figures, and these Starlink ships look really awesome sitting there on the shelf, all displayed nicely, but having that just blank white background wasn't working for me. So I used the poster that came in the box set of the Starlink ship, and this worked fantastic as a backdrop and kind of breaks up the space. Another great thing for the back side of a shelf is special editions. They come in such different odd sizes that it's hard to find a place for them already. So using them in the backside of a shelf is a great place to display them, but also use them to kind of make that shelf look better. And in the last few months, I've been experimenting with collector mounts, different mounts, because they hold a bunch of different things. I use them behind my TV stand to display a wide range of different things. I've even made a couple different videos on how these can be used, but these work great for holding different things, and you can use them to kind of hold a different item up on the sides of different shelves as well as the back side of a shelf. And that can be a great way to back a shelf. You can use these to kind of levitate that item back there. I believe collector mounts started out using these for different comic books, so you could use them for comic books back there, or you could use them for vinyl. They have a whole bunch of different sizes available for different sized items. So you could take anything that's in your game collection that maybe you can't display as it is right now, and then use it as a backing unit for the backside of your shelf, just to have it there displayed and looking awesome. And then one idea that I've kind of touched upon but haven't really gone completely into is using foam core board to kind of modify your shelf as it is. Foam core board is simply a couple pieces of paper with a bunch of foam in the core of the board, and you can find it in different sizes and thicknesses, and use it for pretty much anything if you have a razor blade and some hot glue. I found a person on Pinterest was using foam core board to add levels to the inside of their cube style shelf. And one of the questions that had been presented to me from my friend Sean over at the Cartridge Club was how to divide up a shelf that's a cube style shelf and add levels so that you could get to all of your games and not have to put games behind other games. And simply put, this is the all-around best hack that there is for modifying any type of shelf that you have. Essentially, this makes it so you can make a perfectly designed riser for the backside of any shelf, and then put your games on top of that, and then have other games down in front of it, creating kind of a tiered display while also having a little bit of an empty spot underneath the back games where you can kind of store different items, maybe cords or other items you don't want to have seen visually. And don't be afraid to make these. They are super simple. All you have to do is get some foam core board, which at my local art store is around $7 per board. This is 1/2 inch thick foam core board, so it's thicker than your average foam core board, because I wanted something that was super strong and would be able to hold up most of my different items that I'll be using in it. So you're gonna have to figure out how wide your shelf is by measuring it, and then add that onto your design, as well as figuring out what the depth of the games that you're trying to display are. When it comes to the depth, I like to add a couple inches or at least an inch, so you have a little bit of wiggle room for displaying those different games. And I'll talk about that wiggle room and what you can use it for in the next hack. So after you figure out all the dimensions that you're going to be using for your different sized shelf, you're going to want to cut it with a razor blade. I recommend finding one that gets pretty long to cut through all of that 1/2 inch foam core board. I did find that the foam core board definitely dulls those razor blades really fast, so I recommend having extra replacements nearby so that you could switch them out. And then after you've cut them to size, you simply hot glue the ends and then attach them, and you have a super strong shelf to insert into your shelf. Now that's just the basic design. I've used these for all sorts of different things, while vertically dividing a shelf and also doing this kind of tiered display at the same time. I use that for my vinyl, as well as a few other games that I have in one of my cube style shelves. But you don't have to stop there. You can turn this into a display stand. You can do all sorts of DIY stuff with this, and really it's amazing because all it is hot glue, a razor blade, and some foam core. And prior to finding this idea, I found that a lot of people were using cardboard to do a similar type thing. A lot of people were using pop figures. I recently saw that on Twitter that people were using those, and apparently they're perfect width for the backside of a shelf. You can put a few of them back there, especially if you plan to keep the boxes for those pop figures. It might be a perfect place to use them in the backside of that shelf. Most of the time people are putting games in front of them or figures in front of them, so you don't have to really worry about the way the art is displaying on those back items or really how they look at all. So in general, it's just kind of one of those creative things. You can kind of find your own way of doing it. I just really recommend the foam core idea. It's really simple and inexpensive and a great way to do a more permanent thing to the backside of a shelf, as well as kind of modify all sorts of different things within that shelf. And the last idea today actually came from Single Play Retro Gaming on Twitter, and he talked about putting this kind of foam tape in the backside of a shelf to stop the backsides of games. And it's one of those biggest problems that we have as game collectors, is having those games kind of not line up, or one pushes too far back. And it's kind of a big problem if you just want to grab a game out of there. Instead of it pushing backwards, having something at the backside and bottom of those games will stop them from going backward. Now his idea was to take this foam tape, and it's pretty thick, and put it in a perfect line behind your games. And I think that's a great idea and a very simple one, and also inexpensive. Now the biggest downside of this tape is that it has a really strong adhesive on it, as it's meant for these windows and doors that get opened and shut all the time, and to keep out the cold and the heat. But the adhesive can definitely be removed from whatever you put it on if you choose to change your shelf up in the future with a little bit of Goo Gone. It should be simple enough to take that gook off there. But in general, I like this idea so much that I kind of went out to try to find the best way of doing this without putting any sort of sticky stuff to your shelf. And the best that I could find was again with the foam core board. But this time you don't have to have such a thick foam core board. It just has to kind of raise itself above that kind of curved edges of the majority of video games that are out there, so that you can put it up to it and it'll stop. But I think the best way of doing this is cutting foam core board to the correct width for your shelf. And then it doesn't have to be very deep, just a couple inches or an inch. It doesn't have to be deep at all. It just has to be there as a backstop for the games. And then you can take some of those command strips that are out there and then attach those to the bottom side of it. And that will hold that foam core in place behind your video games. I love command strips because they are really good for attaching things places that you're not sure you're gonna have it as a permanent solution. But if you do it this way, you'll be able to move that piece of foam core board wherever you want, as long as you have extra command strips to replace the ones that you've pulled up. And then lastly, I talked about that little area on the backside of the foam core board displays that I talked about for having a tiered display of your video games in like a cube style shelf or even a regular shelf. And that little extra backing can be used to attach another piece of foam core board just as a lip to the backside of those shelves. And I do recommend doing that because when you put your games on top of that thing, if they do happen to fall off the backside, it's gonna be kind of a pain to move everything and get back there to get that game. So putting that little tiny piece of lip back there will make it so those games don't fall off. It's just another little hack to a hack. So thanks for coming and checking out Discard today. If you have any other ideas for modding a shelf or hacking a shelf or making it just function better, please let me know in the comments below. I am always looking for more ideas. If you want to help out Discard past the subscription, please check out patreon.com/discard and check out all the awesome stuff you can get for $2 a month. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. But otherwise, have a great day and collect what you love. And one more thing, I'm going to be putting in pictures and videos of viewers' game collections into the ends of the videos of Discard. And if you have any of those that you want to send in, I'll be leaving an email address down below and in the description. So be sure to do that if you want to have your pictures and videos in an episode of Discard.
Through this world, will you guide me? Through this pain, will you always hold my hand? When I need you, when I don't know what I'm doing with myself, I'm a lost soul, walking through this world like I have some idea. When I don't, and I take on the baggage 'cause I think that I can.